So before I start this video, I'd just like to thank everyone for subscribing to this channel. I've now reached the milestone of 100 subs, so hopefully I'll be able to continue producing content that you like to see and that I like producing. In this video, I basically compared the performance of the Fuji X100, the original Fuji X100, with my Olympus Pen F to see whether this camera did indeed have those kind of special rendering kind of properties that everyone said they did. What I tried to do in that last video though was just purely look at the image quality, and I thought I'd save my almost like a little review of this camera since the time I've had it, which has been a couple months now, just to go over some of the likes and the dislikes that I've basically encountered while using the Fuji X100. But this camera was released in 2010, so it's about 11 years old. It's the original Fujifilm X100, of which there's now the 100V, which is its fifth incarnation. But this one is the only one that came with a Bayer sensor. All the other cameras in the series come with Fuji's X-Trans sensor, so that's one of the reasons why I wanted to give this one a shot. It's the same lens in all of the cameras in the series. It's basically a 23mm fixed lens with an aperture of f2 and with a nice aperture ring as well. This basically gives you a 35mm general view of the world, which is good for general photography, and I'll talk about it later. But it also has a macro mode which allows you to get up quite close to subjects. It has two viewfinders in this camera. It's got an electronic viewfinder, which is like what you find on most modern digital cameras, but it's also got an optical viewfinder as well, with almost like a hybrid overlay, which allows you to compose, and you know when your shot is in focus. So that's a really good differentiator really between these cameras and other digital cameras. It's also got what they call a leaf shutter. It's not a particularly fast shutter, so for that reason it's also got a 3-stop ND filter built in. So basically, in sunny conditions, if you still want a limited depth of field and be able to blur the background with a large aperture, you can still do that with this the combination of the leaf shutter and the ND filter. Right, so with that out of the way, let's get down to what I like and what I don't like about this camera. So let's talk about the design. It's got a great handling with this form factor. Everything is where you need it. There's great tactile dials for the aperture ring, for the shutter dial, and then also for the exposure compensation. So everything that you need as a photographer is well within reach. You don't even need the screen on to be able to use this camera. It's all there right in front of you. And it's just so light as well. It, like I said earlier, only weighs 440 grams, which for a body and a lens is pretty good. Like my Olympus Pen F actually weighs that without a lens attached. So it's pretty light, and it's just something about it. It just makes you want to pick it up and use it. It just looks so good in the hands, and it's like I said, it's really easy to use. As I said before earlier as well in the specification, it's got a great optical viewfinder. There's a switch on the front here where when you switch it, it switches to the optical viewfinder, and then you can compose and frame through that. There's some clever overlay on the screen which aids your compositions. But failing that, if you want to get a better sense of what the image is going to look like, then you can then switch to the EVF, which is a flick of the switch at the front, and then you're back to the EVF mode. I tend to stick to the EVF, to be honest, because it does give you a better representation of what your final image is going to look like. But it is quite fun and liberating to use the OVF. Although something to be mindful of is the exposure compensation dial. It's quite easy to knock it on this version of the X100. So if you're busy shooting with the OVF, you're not going to see whether you're under or overexposing an image, because you've knocked the exposure compensation from its zero position, or where you've kind of moved it to kind of correctly expose a composition. Right, so let's move to my first dislike of this camera, and it's got to be the weak diopter on the EVF. The optical viewfinder it doesn't have an effect on, but for the EVF there's a diopter on the side of the viewfinder which allows you to correct for very weak prescriptions. So that means I've got to use this camera with my glasses, which is fine in some situations, but when it's bright it's very hard to kind of see the whole scene, and it makes it very difficult because of that to compose an image, I find sometimes. So the diopter is not the best. Yeah, so another like of this camera is the fact that it's so discreet for street photography. Like I said earlier, it's got a leaf shutter and it's so quiet, sometimes you don't even know that you've taken a shot. It's that quiet, and for that reason it's great for kind of street photography. Like I'll just fire off a few shots now and see whether you notice there's any sound coming from this camera. Yeah, so I took about 5 shots there. I honestly think the noise you get from actually depressing the shutter is far noisier than the shutter itself, so it's just brilliant. It's quite light and it's quite compact, I think, for a camera, and like I said, it feels really good in the hand, but it's certainly not what I would call a pocketable camera. Right, on to another dislike of this camera. The shot-to-shot time, what I'm going to call it, is frustratingly slow. So when you take a picture, you can take a few in quick succession, but the camera's going to fill up its buffer and it won't let you kind of take any more shots. If you take a shot now, so take a shot, and then you want to change a setting, it won't let you. It's kind of freezes you out until the camera's finished processing that image. So it can be a little bit frustrating in operation. Yeah, so what I find with this camera as well, which is kind of connected to the slow shot-to-shot time, is the fact that the electronic viewfinder, there's quite a lag when you're using it. So when you kind of compose your shot to press the shutter, there's kind of a little bit of a lag before it kind of shows you the image that it thinks is going to capture for you. So that can be a little frustrating, and especially when you're kind of photographing close-up subjects which move, you know, you want to be able to quickly kind of see what you're going to get before you kind of fully depress the shutter. And a number of occasions, the time, because it's so the lag time is so slow, I've kind of missed critical shots. I decided to stop filming at the last location because the rain was just getting a bit frustrating. So I've come out on a new day in a new location to hopefully finish this vlog looking at the X100. In the last location I was at, I talked about the EVF in that there's quite a lot of lag when you're shooting the images. You know, if you wait around for it to show an actual view of what you actually want to capture on the back of the screen, you could miss the shot. So I'd probably advise about just taking the shot without kind of seeing the preview in the EVF. So that's probably one of the reasons why the OVF is so good. You can kind of just find your composition, make sure it's in focus, recompose if you need to, and then take the shot without worrying what the EVF is doing. And while we're on the subject of the EVF, I highly recommend when you use this camera is don't really look at your photos after you've taken them on the camera itself, because you often feel a bit disappointed when you're taking the image, and then it's not until you get back home on your computer or your laptop or your iPad or whatever, and the images really start to come alive, as then we'll talk about on my next like with this camera. Right, so I've covered 2 likes so far and 2 dislikes. Let's look at another reason why I like this camera, and that is definitely the look that you get from the images. I'm not saying because it's an old camera now it's not going to be the best images, but there's certainly a certain look to the images that you can get from this camera that you don't get with other digital cameras, which can be, like I talked about in my last video, a little bit too clinical. What you get with the X100 is a little bit more kind of like filmic, organic kind of feel to your images. And I put some sample images up now to try and kind of demonstrate this kind of look to the images from the X100. And especially as well, and I'm talking here about images straight out of the camera. I've done very little editing with the raw files from this camera, although I have had quite a lot of success using the Capture One Express that you can install for free and edit your raw files with Fuji cameras, because I haven't found that my old version of Lightroom or Photolab is very good with the raw files from this camera. But another thing to point out here as well is that the camera has actually got an excellent in-camera raw editor. So as long as you shoot raw, you can go back into the camera and you can apply any kind of film simulation you want to that raw image, and also you can adjust the shadows, the highlights, the colours, the noise, the sharpness. You can do so much with the actual editor in camera and completely produce a completely different look and feel to an image that you've kind of captured. And this editor in the camera is so much better than the one on my Olympus camera, for instance, where you can only kind of do minor edits in the camera. So yeah, so definitely the image quality and the amount of editing you can actually do in camera is just brilliant. In terms of the film simulations that this camera has, it only has 3 colour ones, so Previa, the standard Fujifilm simulation, Velvia, and a simulation called Austere. And with all my time with the camera, I've tended to favour the Austere simulation. I think that gives the kind of the best look in my mind to the images. And then maybe in some of the images I've kind of softened the highlights and the shadows just to kind of give a more pleasing look to the final image. But overall the image quality straight out of the camera is pretty good with the X100. Right, so as I'm on a bit of a roll with likes at the moment, we'll go to another like of mine with this camera, and that's the kind of the dynamic range that you can kind of capture. It kind of follows on from image quality, obviously, in terms of how the camera renders the images that you capture. I find with this camera, especially compared to my Olympus Pen F, that it's great at kind of capturing detail in the highlights, and then also retaining kind of shadow detail in the shadows. So yeah, it just seems to capture more information from a scene compared to my other camera. I can certainly see the benefits of having an APS-C crop sensor camera over something like a mirrorless Micro Four Thirds camera in terms of the amount of noise you get in your images. Like when I've taken a few shots of this and zoomed in, the noise is so much lower compared to the files on my Olympus Pen F. So yeah, so if you're really concerned about kind of low light and noise performance, then I highly recommend like a larger crop sensor or even a full frame sensor to minimize the amount of noise in your images. But saying that though, I get quite good results with my mirrorless cameras, and I'm happy with. And then you've got great software out there these days which can do a great job at kind of eliminating or reducing the amount of noise in an image. Right, so on to another dislike, and even though I like the 35mm range that you get with this camera, sometimes you do feel that you want a little bit more reach. And it's probably why I tend to favour interchangeable kind of camera systems, because you can have a number of lenses in your arsenal then which you can use to suit what kind of composition or scene you're kind of actually shooting. So even though I've got no problems with the 35mm lens on this, sometimes I do feel that I could do with a little bit more reach. This is a great, as I'll touch on later, it's almost like a camera to complement your bigger kind of systems, because you can just pick it up and go, and you don't have to worry about what lens you're going to use. You just have to work within the constraints of the fixed lens on the X100. One thing that is to note really, but it's not a like or a dislike, it's just the fact that this camera is not weather sealed, so you can't obviously use it in kind of inclement weather. I'll put up a few examples now, which is the kind of the straight out of camera kind of austere film simulation image, along with just a bog standard export from Capture One Express with no editing, just to show you kind of what extra kind of detail you can extract from the sensor in this camera if you do opt to kind of process the images from it. So bottom line, am I going to keep this camera? What I'm first going to do is I've bought another Fuji camera to compare this against. I've gone for the original Fuji X-E1, which is an interchangeable lens camera. So obviously, yeah, I favour interchangeable lens cameras, so I'm interested to see how those two compare. And with the X-E1, that's the original X-Trans sensor, which is in the X Pro 1. So again, it's a sensor and a processor in the camera combination that people seem to think produces some really kind of organic looking images. So I'm really looking forward to comparing the output of that camera with the X100, and that will kind of help me determine whether I want to stick with Fuji or whether I can keep a Fuji camera to complement my other systems, or whether it will even replace my current Olympus system. But as you could probably see, it's a very capable camera still 11 years on, and for the price I paid for it, which was about £220 in the UK for a camera and a lens, I think is a cracking deal at the moment. You compare that to the latest iteration of the X100, which I think is retailing here in the UK for over £1,000. So it's a great kind of price to get a camera which can produce some great images, and you don't have to worry about lenses. You can just pick it up and go. And just like I said, the great thing about this camera in my mind is the leaf shutter. It's just so quiet, you know, you can go out, snap away, and it doesn't attract any kind of attention in using it. And as I said before, it's just so easy to kind of hold. So it's going to be interesting comparing this with the X-E1. At the moment, I don't feel like it's going to replace any of my system, because I don't feel that the hit rate, because of the kind of the lag and the way I kind of shoot, I don't always nail the kind of the focus or the composition that I'm kind of looking for. So yeah, I'm not sure it's going to replace any of my systems, but it's going to be interesting, like I said, with the X-E1, see whether it can complement my systems in order to give me that kind of filmic, organic look to some of my photographs. Yeah, so I think the X100 is a great camera still in 2021. Just something, every time I go out, I just feel the need to take this out with me as well, because it does help, I find at the moment for me, aid my kind of creative process. Probably because I'm forced to think about my compositions a lot more because of the fixed lens nature, and it's just generally a joy to use. So I really hope you enjoyed this video about the original X100. If you've got any questions about the camera, please put it in the comments below, and I'll try my best to answer it based on the time that I've had with this camera. But I'm still very new to the whole Fuji kind of ecosystem, but yeah, I'll do my best. And yeah, so I really hope you enjoyed that video. Thanks again for all those subscribers that have subscribed to my channel, and I'll see you next time.